The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.
Hello and welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Rebecca Larson. And today, as you can probably tell if you're watching this, I'm joined again by my favorite guest in the whole wide world, Dr. Emma.
Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, Emma. Well,
you're my favorite host. You know that.
Oh, you're so sweet. I paid her to say that, just so you know.
Yeah, let me check. Oh, thanks.
The deposit went through.
Yeah.
So let's start like we always do. It's snowing today in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm. It is. It's. Why would you bring that up, Rebecca?
Well, because it's snowing.
I know. Winter is here. Well, it's not too bad. It's not too bad.
No, it's just flurries right now.
Yeah. You have to keep telling yourself that, because otherwise, what are you going to do?
On a happy note, I looked at the place where I used to live, Fargo, North Dakota, and they're getting like 3 to 5 inches of snow today. So I'm glad I moved. Glad I moved.
Right. Fargo, what a great place. So a show once was pretty intense.
It's exactly like the show.
Is it exactly like that? Is it always winter?
It's always winter.
It's always winter, and there's just murders there.
All the time. Yeah, that's my plug for Fargo.
It's a very good show. It's a very good movie. The Coen brothers are really good.
Yeah.
If you haven't seen the movie came out first by the Coen brothers, Fargo. That's an amazing movie. I mean, it's intense. It's intense, yeah? Disclosure, it's intense. And then the TV show, I mean, not all the seasons are as good, but overall I think it's a very good show.
I never watched the show because I lived in Fargo when the show came out.
Is it forbidden in Fargo to watch it? Don't watch it. You just then you're gonna like have your keys in your hand all the time when you go out in the street with Fargo, right?
Yes. I don't know. I think after the movie, I was like, Fargo's nothing like that. So then I couldn't even watch the show.
Right. And then, very important for people to know, Fargo is in North Dakota. It's not in Minnesota. A lot of people think, because the Coen brothers are from Minnesota, and a lot of the plot happens in Minnesota, that Fargo is, but no, it's technically on the border, right? Is it right on the border?
Yeah, pretty much. It's right on the border of North Dakota and Minnesota. And I think the movie was mostly filmed in Brainerd, wasn't it?
Was it?
I think so. I think that's
Welcome to our show about Fargo. And
my Fargo people who are listening right now are like, woo, Fargo! Woo, woo! I'm from there.
I've been to Fargo. It's nice. I liked it.
Yeah, it's all right. I mean, I was
like, I didn't get murdered. Anything happened like that? Great.
Yeah.
Great place to be.
It was a great place to raise a family. And then I left.
The Midwest is a good place to raise a family. That's true.
Yeah. But we're not here today to talk about Fargo. We're here to talk about one of Dr. Emma's favorite topics. And I probably don't even have to say it, but we're going to talk about Katherine of Aragon today and how she was the...
Not again. Oh, my goodness.
Today's topic is Katherine of Aragon, the OG of Henry VIII's Tudor queen consorts. Does that even make any sense? I hope you.
Yeah, it does. It does.
All right.
Well, I'd say in many ways. First, because she was the first, right? So that gives her, and then because overall she was the most influential. So yeah, I think it's pretty safe to call her the OG.
Yeah. Well, she was married to him for over 20 years, right?
Right. Poor woman. Yes, she was. For that, we have to give her a prize, right?
We do.
Come on.
But I think she was happy to be married to him, wasn't she?
Extremely happy. And for all we talk about Henry VIII, and he wasn't like that when he was 17 when he married Katherine of Aragon. Obviously, he was a very young man, very curious about the world and the bigger world. So I think we're just so obsessed with the picture of Henry in the 30s and the 40s and all that we forget about his earlier life and really how he was a Renaissance prince, right? And he married the ultimate Renaissance princess. So Catherine was like the humanists of her time said she was raised by, and we've talked about this, by her mother Isabel, in a very innovative way, because she was taught all these things like Latin and all that. But also, it's important to know she was the youngest. So by the time that she was born, Isabel, the War of Granada was almost over. So she grew up in a court where everything was just a revolution after a revolution. And of all the daughters of Isabel and Fernando, she was probably the most intelligent one too. Definitely the most cultivated one. So yeah, she What do you want me to say about her? She's just amazing.
She is just amazing. And as many of you know who have been listening to the show since Dr. Emma has been on, Catherine of Aragon has quickly become my favorite of the six wives of
Oh,
Henry VIII. So I know
I paid
people.
her to say that.
Hang on, let me check. Yep, deposit came
Yep.
through.
So basically, we're even. That's good.
Well, today we're looking at, correct me if I'm wrong, like the image of a Tudor
Right.
queen, right?
Right. So I work in a research project where we study the influence of women, and because we are art historians, so you can study the influence of women in Renaissance in many ways, through literature, through many different aspects, right? We concentrate on the what we call the construction of the image of power, which basically means my branding, their brand, right? We talked about the marketing mothers. We study the marketing mothers, the marketing sisters, the marketing daughters, all these elements. It's very similar to the branding nowadays and creating a brand. It's exactly the same, right? And they did it on two levels, on a dynastic level and on in an individual level. Why in an individual level? Because this is the Renaissance and the individual starts to be important. And this is very, very innovative because this combination of those two things gains a lot of traction and power in the Renaissance. Think about all those Tudor monuments with Tudor roses, with all those symbolic elements that we all love, plus the appearance of portraiture, Renaissance portraiture. We've talked about this, right? And how all Holbein. I mean, let's start with Holbein. Holbein came because of Catherine. He didn't come because of Henry VIII. He worked later for Henry VIII because if you were in England and the king said, hey, you come and work for me now instead of her, you have to do that, right?
Yeah.
The Horn Boots, Torrigiano. I have a feeling Torrigiano and Henry had a fight. I've been thinking about this a lot. Remember Torrigiano who broke Michelangelo's nose?
How could I forget? That's like the best story ever.
Yeah, I would like to see what happened between Henry VIII and Torrigiano. Because he not only carved the tombs of Elizabeth of York and Henry VII, but he created a project for the tombs of Henry VIII, Catherine of Aragon, and their daughter Mary. He did some parts of it, but then he just left. And he resurfaces in Seville, where Charles V married Isabel of Portugal. So we know Charles was in England several times. It's very likely that Torrigiano left with Charles at some point. Probably he was like, take me away from this guy, Charles. I can't have him anymore. No, too much. I'm gonna break his nose and then I'm gonna be in real trouble. Imagine he would have broken Henry VIII's nose.
Yeah, then everybody, I mean, would really know his name. Like there would be
Then
no
he would
question.
be my ultimate hero.
Although if it were Henry VIII, he probably wouldn't want that story to get out. So that would be probably covered up, huh?
So that's what I'm saying. Why don't we know when he left? Why don't we know?
Maybe, I mean, it's possible. I mean, it's completely possible.
What I think, not punch Henry VIII in the face, but what I think could have happened is a disagreement. And I think Torrigiano wasn't a person to back down. And I think Henry VIII wasn't used to people saying, well, I don't think you're not the artist, so blah, 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 blah. And he would be like, excuse me? So I think that's what really happened between Torrigiano and Catherine. Well, what's he going to do? There we go again.
Yeah, you know? Henry in his temper again.
Oh, sorry, Pietro, you'll have to go. Charles, take him. Anyway, so that's what we study. We study how women, and because we've talked about this, and it's good that you brought up Henry, trying to hush things, because all of the documents, not all of them, but a lot of the documents related to Catherine of Aragon have disappeared. It's very important to study the construction of her image of power because that's how we can pick all these snippets and little things here and there to create a story, to fill in those gaps that the documents are not there anymore, right?
Yeah.
And the story that you create with that is a very powerful one because, I mean, think about it. If she brings Holbein, if she brings the Horn Boots, if she brings Preto Torrigiano, if she brings Juan Luis Vives, I mean, Nicolas Grazia, a famous astronomer, worked for her too. I mean, she's the one behind the scenes. definitely with fun guy, but aka Sir Henry Guilford, right? She did these things alone. And of course, Henry was in agreement with her on all these things. I'm not saying Henry didn't play a role. I'm saying she was the one to have the agency to do those things, the contacts, all those things, right? For example, let's think about someone that we know for sure that came because of Catherine, was Sebastian Cabot. Sebastian Cabot, who became a world famous explorer and who traveled to America, one of the first people who came to America, came to England. Well, we're not in England now. Went to England to work for Henry and Catherine to draw maps of Guyenne when they were fighting against the King of France in 1512. That's when Ferdinand of Aragon, Fernando, sent Sebastian Cabot to Henry and Catherine on Catherine's request. So all these very important leading Renaissance people came to, if you think about it, after Catherine dies, what famous, world famous artist comes to England after that?
After?
Yeah, in Henry VIII's reign.
I feel like I should know the answer to this. Is this
zero? No. Torrellano, Holbein, and the Hornboots, who are, not as known but should be, are the people who make a revolution in the visual arts in England, and then they're gone as soon as not Holbein dies and all that, but it's after that the arts really decline, to be honest with you, in England, until they are reactivated a little bit when Mary is queen, because Antonis More comes, because I'm not saying, what I'm saying is the relations with the Spanish monarchy brought a lot of artistic innovation and definitely a revolution in the visual arts, because the Spanish monarchy was already doing that. The first one to do that was Isabel of Castile. She was the first woman to rule the crown of Castile. There had been other queens of Castile and important women, but she was the first powerful Castilian queen and the first powerful European queen in the Renaissance. She had to create this image for herself, pulling from things that men had done, right? But changing it because she was a woman. And we can see a lot of these things when we analyze Catherine's role in the change of the way kingship and queenship is represented in England during her reign.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, especially Catherine's influence on the successive Tudor queen consorts. What standard did she set for them, and did they copy it?
Yes, they did. She set the standard because, for example, she was the first queen to commission portraits of herself and give them to people like Maud Parr, Catherine Parr's mother, or to her own daughter. We know that Mary had. So things like that. Bringing Holbein, who, come on, he puts a face to the Tudor court, right?
Yeah.
And then he paints Anne Boleyn, and the Hornboots paint Anne Boleyn and the successive wives. She's brought these artists, and then they are taken from her by Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. When we, for example, let's take the inventory of her goods. When she dies, she's stripped from everything. But when she dies, there's a few things left in Baynard's Castle in London that used to belong to her, right? Not anymore. For 10 years, she could not have been there. But in 1536, she dies. Just a second.
I can't help but notice you have a monkey on your mug.
Yes, there's a monkey in my mug. I think it's
Catherine of Aragon liked monkeys.
Yes. I think Anne Boleyn didn't like them, right?
I think we discussed that previously.
Oh, maybe I selected this for a reason. No, I'm only kidding, guys. Come on. No, but when her goods, the inventory of her goods was carried out, the inventory says the best pieces, and one by one sent to the queen, sent to the king. So they appropriated everything that she had. When we analyze the trajectory of people like the Hornboots, when they start so they migrated to England in the 1520s, but they, for example, Lucas doesn't become king's painter until 1531 and is made an English subject in 1534. Susanna's been there for years, but she doesn't receive Christmas gifts until 1532. What Henry and Anne are trying is to attract them to their sphere because they had been working for Catherine. Think about the Hornbook miniatures where it says H and K and love nuts and things like that. So it's a strategy to say, because she had been so successful disseminating this image of herself, her successor, Anne Boleyn, wanted to do the same, use the same artists. Think about, who do you think designed the Most Happy Medal?
Yeah, that's interesting to think about it that way.
That's the only image we have of Anne Boleyn during her lifetime, right?
Yeah.
It's in the British Museum. It's a portrait medal. Portrait medals became very popular in the Renaissance to showcase celebrations of things, right? So when Anne was crowned queen, that medal was made to give to people so they would see the face and know who was their new queen, right? And that's how that medal got made. That's the reason why it was made, right? Who made that? Well, when you look at the model of that medal, it's either Holbein or the Hornbooks. There's no other artist in the Tudor court. And we know that they were creating these portrait miniatures, which are very similar. So it was either Holbein or the Hornbooks who created this medal. Highly likely the Hornbooks, because they were the ones. Holbein came in 1527, then left, then came back and was more doing other things. But the Hornbooks were definitely doing things like this. So this is what I'm saying is that Anne Boleyn not only took Catherine of Aragon's things, but also appropriated her artists. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I mean, it's
a good strategy if you think about it.
Yeah. Why not continue as the previous had done, especially since it always seems like Anne Boleyn was trying not to sway too far from what Katherine of Aragon was doing.
Well, that was very smart of her to do, you know? And then you have to think there weren't artists like this in England before. So why would you choose someone less good? Someone who didn't do such a good job when you are the one in power now.
Yeah.
You would choose at least the best of the best, right?
Yeah.
Think about the whole Holbein design of the procession for the coronation of Anne Boleyn. Things like this. But then he creates a design for a cup for Jane Seymour too.
Yes.
So this is what I'm saying. It's the same artist, but these artists were brought by Catherine of Aragon. Not by Anne Boleyn, not by Jane Seymour, not by Catherine Parr. The narrative has not been that, because for the longest time, the narrative has been that, for example, Catherine Parr was the greatest patron of the arts out of the 6 wives of Henry VIII. That's not true. She was amazing, but she was following the lead of someone.
Yeah.
And definitely, as far as I'm not an Anne Boleyn specialist, but as far as I've studied Anne Boleyn, there's nothing innovative about what she does.
Can we go back to the Most Happy Medal? Because I think one of the questions that comes up the most about that is that she is wearing a gable hood and she is best known as the French hood lady, right? So why on earth was she wearing a gable hood in the medal, do you think?
Because that is a medal to signify that she's becoming Queen of England. So fashion and for these people, attire had meaning, political meaning, because usually people would see the person, but they might have not hear them or couldn't. So what you wore was extremely important. If you are trying with this portrait medal to tell people this is the new Queen of England, it is better that she's dressed in the English attire, right? Otherwise, it's like, oh, she was raised in France and Burgundy and that. One thing that you mentioned is the French hood, I think you mentioned. Yeah. Yeah. I keep hearing this French hood thing. And I don't know what sources these people are using for that, but it's not called that, technically.
Really?
It's a Burgundian headdress. It's not. It was used in the court of Margaret of Austria. It was used in the court of Isabel of Castile. If you look at the portraits of people like Juana, Catherine's sister, that is in Valladolid, in the Museo Nacional de Escultura, she's wearing this in 1505. Catherine of Aragon brought this to England. You can see when you study the the sources in England, how they are starting to, when Catherine becomes queen, to describe a lot of things that are, this skirt, very strange skirt, very strange something, very strange. Why is it strange? Because they hadn't seen it before. She's the one to introduce this fashion, not Anne Boleyn. Why is this keeps being repeated? I don't really know.
Well, it's like so much of history now. I think it's put out there and then just repeated over and over like it's fact.
Right, but it's not. And if it's facts, I would like to see the sources, because I'd be more than happy to change my idea on this. But it's simply, you over the years you study things like portraiture, and you study especially the Spanish court. The Spanish court was deeply, and this has been studied by Spanish scholars very well. The Spanish court of Isabel and Fernando was deeply influenced by the Burgundian way of doing things. So this is what Catherine grew up with. I think do people imagine she came with a polka dot dress, flamenco dance dress to England? No. We have to think of the context of the time. At the time, the Spanish court is Spanish in name, but in dress is Burgundian. With changes that have been done because it's Spain, and there's some, like, for example, later on in the reign of Henry and Catherine, we see two types of portraits of her relatives, of her female relatives, especially where this is seen, right? We see the very Burgundian portraits of her nieces, like the first ones, like Isabel of Austria. So these women that are being raised with Anne Boleyn by Margaret of Austria, right? Then in the 1520s, this fashion kind of, because the Spanish monarchy is becoming so relevant and prominent, the fashion changes a little bit, and they start to have like these big slashed sleeves and other types of elements, but it's always like a combination of the Burgundian with the Spanish fashion. The other side comes from the big influence that Moorish fashion had in Spain. So we have all these very rich cloths of gold with, or for example, all these Turkish carpets we see in the Holbein pictures and portraits, right?
Yeah.
We have to think that the Spanish monarchy stretched throughout the Mediterranean, and they had, there's a very good letter in 1509 or 1510, the first year of the reign of Henry and Catherine, where Fernando sends a letter to Catherine to say, you have to tell Henry to respect the Venetians. And he goes on why the Venetians are so important. The Venetians are the one importing all these things from Turkey, from the Far East and all of that. So he's teaching his daughter politics. He's saying, you have to respect these people, because otherwise you're going to have trouble with all these nice things that you like to have. Think about something like in the first or second year, again, of the reign, the carnival was introduced, and they all dressed as Turks, it says, and they brought swords and all types of things like that. So Henry was, celebrating the carnival dressed like a Turk with all these things that Catherine had brought. And think about the dowry. Catherine's dowry was probably the largest dowry in Renaissance. The art collection she brought, those are all, the problem with those, you know what it is, right? All those sources, they're all in Spanish.
That's a problem for people like me.
Well, you can still overcome, even if you don't speak Spanish, you can overcome that. There's a lot of help now and then you can reach out to Spanish scholars. What is not okay is to decide to ignore those sources and to create a narrative that is not true, and just stick with it because, you already have 3 or 4 books on it.
This is so true. This is probably the biggest frustration I'm just going to say in Tudor research or Tudor history, is only focusing on the English perspective. And there have been others who have looked at different sources, but as a whole, I feel like the Tudor historians tend to just focus on the English sources. And when
they branch out, it's always France and Italy.
Yes.
It's never Spain.
Yeah.
I go through catalogs with pieces that are very similar to pieces in the Prado Museum, in Patrimonio Nacional in Spain, and not one single Spanish source or work has been cited.
You're
So
missing
this is a
so
problem.
much. Yeah.
They are missing so much. And you don't need to know Spanish. You need to collaborate with Spanish scholars who have done. I mean, don't you think that there's tons of work on the court of Isabella and Ferdinand, on their dress, on their jewels, on their everything, on the influence they had? Come on.
Yeah.
Charles V the same. Charles V the same.
I
So
just
that's.
I just had a discussion with Dr. Lacey on this subject.
Oh, congratulations to Dr. Lacey on getting her doctorate. I love that episode on beauty, by the way. That was amazing.
Yeah, that was
Guys,
another.
you have to go and listen to that. I was walking around the Dema Casca Lake here in Minneapolis, and I it finished too quick. I was like, it's done. What do you mean? It was so good. Congratulations to her.
Oh, I'm glad that you enjoyed that. Well, I had her on again recently where we talked about the women surrounding the mystery of the princess in the tower.
Yes.
And she had discussed how she thinks that there needs to be more research into the Spanish sources of that time to see what the Spanish were saying about Perkin Warbeck. And you were the first person that I thought of, like, who better than to dive into those Spanish sources?
Yeah, I wish I had time because, again, when all these things, because that periodically comes around, right? Oh, the princess in the tower, and I'm in this world too, and I'm like, oh, let's go. And they're like, we've looked under every rock. And then you go to look in the Spanish databases, and there's so many chronicles and things that I don't see cited anywhere that talk about the princess in the tower.
Wow.
I personally don't have time for that. But I encourage people to reach out. There's a lot of also new scholars in Spain that are looking for support. We should collaborate more.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
And if, you are a Spanish researcher and you just so happen to be listening to this episode,
Llámanos.
I was just going to say, maybe you should reach out to either Emma or myself and we'll see.
Llámame.
No,
Yeah.
I think that's great. And you make such a great point about that. There's so much more that needs to be researched when it comes to history in general, especially Tudor history, to find out the true story. It should be a well-rounded story, not just a one or two-sided story.
And the thing is, this is not Australia during the Tudors. This is Spain. Spain and England during this time have strong connections, historical, cultural, artistic, political. I mean, they were allies for such a long time in a crucial period. Another thing I would say, I know there's a lot of work on, was Anne Boleyn in love with Henry VIII? And that's great, maybe, but there's been a lot talked about that. Why don't we shift to the early years of Henry VIII? That's not very well known, and that's when he gains all his power. A big armada is created. I mean, the Scots are defeated. He captures 2 cities in France. He's in the top of his game.
Yeah.
Yet, this seems to, most books you start and it's already they're already 1526.
Because of the drama.
Really? You think it's because of the drama? Never would have guessed that.
That's honestly that was what initially piqued my interest in the Tudors, was all the drama.
You're also into drama? Me too.
I love drama.
It's a salty story.
It is. But I think a lot of people start there, and the longer you're in it, the more interest you have in other things.
But listen to this, for example. I'm going to give you a little thing today. You were talking about the princess in the tower, right? And this is even before the Tudors.
Yes.
Right? And when I saw that post with Dr. Lacey, you shared a portrait of someone, of Margaret of York.
Yeah.
Who obviously was English. She wasn't from New York. She wasn't from New York. New York wasn't even there yet. She's from the old York, right? The original, the OG York. So she goes to Burgundy and she ends up in the Burgundian court. And remember that picture that you shared?
I know. I'm going to pull it up here while we're talking about it because I want to make sure that I have it top of mind here. So we're going to look up Margaret of York because there's really one.
Yes,
portrait.
It's in the Louvre with, for example, also that museum. I have to go back because it's such an amazing place. It's just so packed with people every time you go. It's just.
Okay.
I'll take you there. You have to go to the Louvre. It's
I would
an
love
amazing.
to.
Yes, yes. You have to be ready though. There's a lot of people always. But that portrait, first of all, red and white roses.
Yeah, on her little necklace. What would you call that thing that she's wearing? Was it a necklace?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And it's
Collar
like
necklace.
alternating red and white roses.
Exactly. So it's always been said that Henry VII decided that the red and white rose was for the Tudors. Was it Henry VII, or was he picking on something else? Because this portrait is before that time.
Right. Well, the Wars of the Roses, white was for the House of
Right.
York and red was for Lancaster, but she's wearing both.
Hmm. So, and now take a look at her headdress.
So she's got one of those pointy hat things.
I love those. Don't you love those?
I don't understand them, but yeah, it was the fashion of
We
the
should
time.
get one and just wear it for the show. What do you think?
Okay. Can I still get my tiara?
Okay.
Okay.
No French hood though, because we've agreed that doesn't exist.
Yeah,
no, I mean it does, but it's different.
Yeah. Okay, so she's got
the pointy one.
I want the pointy one. She's got the pointy hat with the veil, and then she's wearing like a black thing over her hair.
You don't see anything there? Maybe in that headdress? A little jewel or something?
Oh, I guess I've never noticed that before.
Okay, can you tell us what you see?
Yeah, okay, this is crazy. There's a bee with a little pearl hanging from it.
A bee is in
It looks very similar to something.
A bee is in Barcelona?
No, okay, so it looks like Anne Boleyn's bee.
Does it now?
I've never noticed this before. Emma, seriously.
I noticed I talked about this in a conference. I can't remember where, but I have talked about this before. Just I think there's some people that won't engage with this, but yeah, it's the bee. And it's if you look at it, it's very similar to Anne Boleyn's bee in the shape. It's not one pearl, but the Anne Boleyn bee has 3 pearls. You can easily add pearls to something like that. So my thought has always been, you know, in the recent Six Lives exhibition, they said that the Anne Boleyn portrait in the National Portrait Gallery with the bee could have been a construct from Elizabethan time, right?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't common for women to wear something like for the last name, right? Like Boleyn. There's a little fly in front of me. Sorry. But what if this is not true, and this bee that belonged to Margaret of York, who lived in the Burgundian court, ended up in Anne Boleyn's possession when she goes to Burgundy to live with Margaret of Austria.
Seriously, Emma, this is groundbreaking. I've never seen this bee before until you just pointed it out to me.
I love that you like this. Great.
How have I never noticed this? I bet there are other people right now who are listening or watching this video who have looked at this portrait of Margaret of York 100 times and just looked past this bee.
They're not neurotic art historians. I'm sorry.
This is crazy. Okay, so I'm gonna end up posting an image of this and a zoom in shot of this bee on social media.
We should put them both together and let people decide for themselves.
Yeah, we're gonna do that, and I'll try maybe to do something with that on this video as well. So if people
and even if it's not that specific bee, that's a lead. That's a lead that we should follow because Margaret of York was English, because she went to Burgundy, because Margaret of Austria inherited a lot of her stuff, and because Anne Boleyn lived with her when she was sent by Katherine of Aragon.
I just can't get over how much that bee looks like Anne Boleyn's bee necklace. Like even like we call it the font. I'd say even the font that's used looks the same to me.
Yeah, because it's got the same structure, doesn't it?
It does.
Mm-hmm.
This is your bomb for today on the show.
Oh, well, I've been meaning to tell you for some time, but but the other day when Dr. Lacey mentioned, then you posted that, you're like, okay, the time has come.
It's time.
The time has come to talk about this.
Wow. Okay, okay. Can we talk about something else on her necklace too?
Yeah.
So I'm trying to figure out, so she's got the red and white roses alternating, and then underneath that are hanging X's and C's. What's that about?
Charles was her husband, so the C's are for her husband.
Charles of Burgundy.
Yeah, and then does this picture not remind you of another very famous picture? Oh, you're not an erotic art historian. Sorry, I'll remind you which picture.
I was like, should I know the answer to this?
Okay. There's a very controversial portrait by Mitchell Sittau in Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna, thought for the longest time to be Catherine of Aragon, now thought maybe to be Mary Rose Tudor, not Mary Rose Tudor, it's Catherine of Aragon. Very famous one. She's
Yeah.
looking down. She has a necklace with case. It's a very similar model to that one. And that is in Vienna. That was probably in Margaret of Austria's collection too.
Oh.
And we have in King Henry VIII's Book of Payments, there were thousands of Ks and Hs made in gold. Thousands. So it's not Mary Rose Tudor, it's Catherine of Aragon.
Thank you. I've never thought it was Mary Rose, honestly. I
don't think anyone has, other than the person who wrote about it.
Except that person. Well, sometimes we come up with theories, right? And it's okay to come up with theories as long as you can back them up. It's
essential to doubt everything and come up with theories. Yes.
Yeah. It's very important, though, to go and do research that backs up your theory.
I'm more than happy to be proven wrong too. You know, I may sound like I know it all sometimes, but I don't. So I'm more than happy to be proven wrong in all of this. But as far as I've studied this portrait for years, I've been obsessed with this portrait for years. And when I see a portrait and it's Catherine, I kind of know right away. And then this occasion, I just knew right. There's other portraits of the same woman by the same artist, and then that same woman is painted by the same artist in a little painting called The Assumption of the Virgin that is in Washington, D.C. And Mary Rose wasn't in Isabel of Castile's court. She wasn't even born when that was painted. So it can't be Mary Rose. That's what I'm saying. I know it can't be Mary Rose because it doesn't add up.
This is how we know you're a good historian, because you are willing to be proven wrong. You're like, if I'm wrong, tell me and let's talk about it. And that's one of the things that I appreciate about you so much, Dr. Emma, is that you.
Oh, thank you. I know I may sound like I'm not welcoming to new things, especially proving me wrong, but I am. Maybe I just get intense about the things I love, you know? It's not, but I'm so happy to talk about these things, to share theories. I think everyone can contribute to this, because there's people that are so into this that find amazing stuff too. I have people who help me who are not historians. It just, they like it. And everybody, with the internet, this has just changed so much, right?
Yeah.
Everybody can make discoveries. Everybody can prove historians wrong. This is what it is about.
It is. I recently had a listener reach out to me with a theory that she had on something. And she had reached out to a big historian with this theory. And this historian essentially told her she was silly. What a silly idea. And my response was, hey, it's good to question everything. If you have if you have an idea that you think something is right, go dig deeper, do some collaborative work with other people and see if you can prove your theory right. I don't think it's for anybody to say that's a silly idea. That's not how we do it.
My advice to anyone who struggles with that, who reaches out to a historian and they get this type of answer, is persevere. Because sometimes big historians, when you send something that they haven't seen, they get a bit annoyed.
Yeah.
So persevere, reach to another one, reach to 5, Historians, we're supposed to do that. That's part of our job. Our job is to question everything and to analyze new evidence and have our own theories. I have many theories that I'm sure will be wrong.
Right. Well, look, this is why I was doing my research into Thomas Seymour. And when I began that, everybody was like, you're crazy. The story's already set in stone. And I was like, I don't think it is. I don't think people have really dug deep enough. And lo and behold, I'm finding out that there's a lot of resources that people weren't looking into to find out more about the story. So
I must say, when I'm looking out on all my portraits and things, I'm always thinking of this guy now to see if I find anything for you.
I love
Because I
that.
know, well, we have that evidence you told me about the portrait they were sending each other, little portraits and all that. That's very, and the paintrix. That's very, very important. Very important because he is next to power. So all these artists, all these things, he was very involved. So I know he has a beard. I mean, it's not that easy. I know, but
Yeah.
if you're studying kind of portraits of the time, you always need to have things in mind. Who could it be? Why was this made? For what reason? And things like that. As soon as you told me there was big miniatures involved, now I'm obsessed.
I love it.
So yeah, I do look for those things too, because I have to expand. And that's why I wanted to talk about this today, because Catherine of Aragon is so influential that she models the image of all the wives of Henry VIII. So and her own daughter, who after is basically, sorry to say, copied by her successor and sister Elizabeth I. And I'm not saying copied in a bad way, I'm saying copied in a good way. What are you going to do? If your sister was the first ruling woman in the history of your country and you're the next one, of course you're going to continue what she's done. This narrative that Elizabeth broke from everything that Mary ever did, that's not true either.
Yeah.
She was smart enough not to do that, like her mother was, not to do that with Catherine of Aragon.
Well, so we've talked about Anne Boleyn and how she continued what Catherine of Aragon was doing. Let's move to Jane Seymour. Even though she had a short reign, obviously we have the Holbein portrait of her. And I think the impression is
sketch and portrait.
Yes,
so we have both.
Amazing. I think the impression has always been that Jane Seymour tried to model herself after Catherine of Aragon.
I agree with that.
Okay.
And if you look at that portrait and you look at the jewel she's wearing a big jewel with letters, right? Which are the Greek letters for Christ. And you go to the Hornbound miniature in the National Portrait Gallery with an inscription that is Catherine of Aragon, she's wearing the same jewel. And that's only a little miniature, but the model is the same model. So that miniature portrait of Catherine was probably also made in a bigger format like Jane Seymour's, and they were displayed together. The problem is Catherine's image was destroyed, probably, for obvious reasons, right? Remember I talked about this inventory in Baynard's Castle? You know, when this was carried out, there was one portrait. One portrait. No, two. And guess who the portrait was of?
Who?
The only picture that was a portrait was a double portrait of Henry and Catherine. So imagine the guy that arrived there. Poor guy. What am I going to do with this? Because it'd been 10 years since that image was prohibited. And to me, the fact that she left a portrait of both of them for Henry there to see, it's a bit of a slap in the face. Yeah. And obviously to Anne Boleyn too. And that portrait, that was a double portrait. Do you know how many double portraits there were in England in 1536 documented? Zero.
Not very. I was just going to say.
One. The only other portrait that I've found around the same time, double portrait, it is in the Royal Collection Trust, is a portrait, and it's not a double portrait. There's three people in here. It's Francis I, we talked about this portrait, and Eleanor of Austria, and he's looking all sleazy. And behind, he's got someone. Remember that portrait? That's the only portrait that I've identified in that time. So this double portrait of Henry and Catherine was likely displayed with this other portrait of Francis and Eleanor that is making fun of Francis. Because Francis and Catherine hated each other.
Yeah.
He said she was ugly, deformed, and something else. Can't remember the other one.
Probably old.
Old, deformed, and ugly, or something like that. Charming chap.
Because he was so hot.
Oh, yeah. Google Francis I. That's all you need to do. Yeah. But I mean, it's a political statement too, He's basically telling the man-child, Henry, what are you doing with an old wife that can't give you a son? Look at me, all glamorous with all, So he's just poking at Henry, really.
Yeah.
And he gets his way.
Yeah, I was just going to say, what an interesting way to get into the head of another monarch and distract him with things that maybe he shouldn't be distracted with. Like, what a interesting ploy on Francis the First part. He's like, hey, buddy, over there. I know we don't get along sometimes, but your wife, man, she is old and ugly. I mean,
remember that time
gosh.
I beat you up?
Remember that?
Remember that time I beat you up when I met your wife and I had dinner with her? Because Francis and Catherine had dinner together. Oh, that must have been, and she wore her most glamorous Spanish jewels and attire to dine with Francis I. If that is not having, is that not being the daughter of Isabel of Castile and Fernando of Aragon? I don't know what it is, because, it's very cheeky to do that, but she did it. And that's why Francis, and Henry, and when Charles V marries Isabel of Portugal, Francis is captured. He's a prisoner. His sister, who's the one really, getting him out of trouble, like most women did back then, was the one to send pictures of Francis and his sons to Catherine and Henry to say, we want to marry Tudor to Francis. Imagine that day. That's the day Catherine commissioned that portrait. She sends miniature portraits of Francis and his two sons to propose marriage to Mary Tudor. The following year, the ambassadors arrive, the French ambassadors, and what does Sir Henry Guilford have for them? A nice banquet in Greenwich, where Therouanne is featured, painted by Holbein. Therouanne was the city that Henry captured, and even in the accounts it says that the colors were Spanish. The colors that Holbein used were Spanish.
Interesting.
Nicolas Kratzer was involved in this, who was an astronomer. He created like a set of like a solar system and planets in the banquet hall too. And the Hornboots were involved, and women artists, even like a woman artist from Milan called Alice Carmelian was involved too, and a guy from Naples called Vincent Volpe, who were two of the artists that Catherine had also brought to England, who were from Milan and Naples, two places that were in the Spanish monarchy. So basically, when they arrived to England, and then Henry is not very smart. He invites these people, to these ambassadors, to let's study this marriage thing that you proposed for my daughter. And then he has the city captured from France, and the chronicle says, and he said, look, do you like it?
So ridiculous.
So ridiculous. And that's the first time that Hans Holbein works for the court, for Sir Henry Guilford. Not for Henry. In my dissertation, and I want everybody to know this was in my dissertation, if you hear it somewhere else, or see it written in other places, Dr. Emma said it first. It was a set of necklaces made called the black necklaces. There's a lot of designs by Holbein with motifs from the Old Testament. What did Henry VIII argue to break off his marriage to Catherine? Something from the Old Testament, right?
Yeah.
So these are my theory is that all these jewels that were created with scenes from the Old Testament, the women wear in Holbein's pictures, there's many of them, were part of what I called in my dissertation the court of defense. So people just making a statement about who they were really supporting. It wasn't the French, and it wasn't really truly Henry. But then Henry decided, I don't care, I'm the king. And Wolsey was also involved, who was obviously, pro-French.
Yes, he was.
Yeah. Nobody's perfect.
Silence. Okay, all right. So we talked about Anne Boleyn. We talked about Jane Seymour. Another Anne of Cleves wasn't queen for very long. And do we see...
But very interesting, too, because Holbein paints her, and Henry VIII sends Holbein to paint her. But the other important thing is he sends Susanna Hornbook to get her. And Susanna's an artist. And for the longest time, it's been said that the Hornbooks and Holbein collaborated. I don't think Holbein painted all these things alone. I think there was a collaboration between the Hornbooks, who had already been painting miniatures of these queens and all that, to to when Holbein arrived, they were like, look at all our sketches and things. And you said I already dropped my bomb, but I'm going to drop another one if you don't mind.
Oh, okay.
Also, in my dissertation from 2022, just saying.
Just putting this out there.
Just putting this out there. I suggested that, you know how we know about the famous Blackfriars trial, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Blackfriars was there were friars there. That's where it gets its name from, right? Baynard's Castle is very close to there. In the time of Eleanor of Castile, do you know where we talked about Eleanor of Castile?
Ooh.
Married to Edward the First.
Okay, all right.
We've talked about her.
Yes.
She's medieval. She's way back. But in her time, she came from Castile. She had a scriptorium. A scriptorium is a place where scribes would copy manuscripts, right? And friars did that a lot, right? And that was in Blackfriars. So there was a scriptorium in the 13th century, a scriptorium, a place where scribes would copy manuscripts and that. My argument is that in 1527, that picture of Therouanne is taken to Greenwich via the Thames from Baynard's Castle. My argument is that there was a workshop in Baynard's Castle and Blackfriars. Not only scribes in the time of Catherine of Aragon, but artists like the Hornboots and then Holbein were working in that workshop. Because later on, another famous world artist called Anton van Dyck, who works for Queen Henrietta Maria and for Charles I, works in Blackfriars too, and his workshop is there, and he dies there actually. Mm-hmm. So I think that Catherine of Aragon revitalized this place, this scriptorium, but turned it into a painter's workshop during her reign. And that's where Holbein worked. And that's where then Henry Guilford made all this fun magic happen. Because Baynard's Castle had one of the only ports in the Thames, in London, in the city of London. It was very easy to take things from the Queen Hithe, it was called Queen Hithe Port, to places like Greenwich or other places. So that's my other bomb.
Wow.
This episode is definitely intense.
This is one of the more intense episodes that we've done, isn't it? But I think it's good for us to talk about these things. It's good to get these subjects out there and get other people talking about it as well. Yeah,
and if anyone, because my dissertation is in Spanish, and I know that can be daunting, and it's a very long dissertation. It's 919 pages long.
What? You did something that was long?
Yeah, and painful. Yeah. But if anybody needs help with anything of this, wants to cite it, wants to know more about it, reach out. I'm more than happy, and I can look for the page and I can let you know what I said. And so don't be scared that it's in Spanish, because I can help you with that, you know? I am, as you know, I am doing all that I can to disseminate my work. I'm finding it a bit difficult because of this big narrative, right? Which I get, you know, you don't want people to come and rip apart what you think you but it's important, and I'm going to continue to do it. So if anybody wants to reach out, I'm more than happy to talk to them, to collaborate, let's find out more things. There's new things. There's just this morning I saw apparently a new manuscript that belonged to Katherine of Aragon that I didn't know about. See how amazing this is? So let's collaborate.
Dr. Emma has an open door policy. That's what we take from this closing today.
Not today with the snow in Minnesota, but yes, reach out, please. I am more than willing to collaborate with anyone who wants to know about my work, or has ideas, has information, or just wants to tell me, hey, but I like this other thing, let's chat about it. I love all types of topics too. I mean, I'm not just close to Katherine of Aragon and the Tudor court. I'm interested in many things, as you can tell from, I'm just interested in everything.
Yeah, I think that's important. I'm interested in everything too. It's good to understand all of history when you study it.
Yeah, and I'm a pretty nice person. person too. Come on, reach out. I'm here. I'm here for you guys.
She's all right.
She's all right.
I'm just kidding. Dr.
Depends on the day. Depends on the day.
No,
if she hasn't had any coffee, please don't reach out.
Don't reach out before coffee, whatever you do. Well, Dr. Emma, thank you so much for coming on today and enlightening us once more.
Well, I want to thank you, Rebecca, because I do think I'm getting my workout because of you and because of the space you've given me and the way you treat me is just incredible. I want to thank you for that. You're amazing.
Oh, you know I love you.
Oh, me too.
We'll have you back again sometime soon, hopefully.
Okay.
All right, bye.
Are you sure? Bye, guys. Have a great day.
And that concludes another episode of the Tudors Dynasty podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you love the show and would like to show your support, consider becoming a patron over on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Tudors Dynasty. Over there, you'll get commercial-free episodes, early access, and some patron-exclusive content as well. If you would prefer to show your support in another way, head on over to my website, tudorsdynasty.com, and click on the shop to see some of the new merchandise that I have available. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.
The Tudors Dynasty Podcast.